I'm just going to invite you into our next session. And I think it's very exciting for me personally, because these are two people who've been quite instrumental in my thinking as over the last few years while I've been on my PhD journey. I was introduced to Bronfenbrenner by Professor Conor McGuckin, who's my supervisor and is on the couch, as a supervisor should be. And Professor Conor McGuckin is, I'm here trying to find my notes, sorry, is a professor of educational psychology at Trinity College Dublin, for those that don't know him, and convenes the Inclusion in Education Society Research Group. And I first met with Professor Noirin Hayes at the ESER conference when we attended together, sitting in the back seat of the car. Again, I think that deepened my thinking on Bronfenbrenner, and she is a visiting academic at the School of Education, Trinity College Dublin, and a Professor Emerita for the Centre for Social and Educational Research in TU Dublin. And without further ado, this is titled, When Life Gives You Lemons, Take Them All, Exploring Issues and the New Entangled Relationships for Researchers Against a Proposed Bronfenbrenner Approach. So I'm going to hand over to you, Conor.
Thanks, Mary, and good morning, well, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you enjoy this session. Maybe how we'll start it is I'll maybe pose a couple of questions for Noirin maybe to tackle, and maybe in about 10 minutes time, we'll be able to open up for the chat box, and if anybody's got any questions or comments or observations, myself and Noirin will try our best to tackle those for you at that stage. And Noirin, it's good to see you again today. I'm just wondering, maybe for all of us, and some people won't ever have heard or come across that word Bronfenbrenner before, maybe just wondering, can you tell me, as if we were having a conversation in the pub, no big words, nothing too highfalutin, just very basic and straightforward, who or what is Bronfenbrenner?
I love the what. I love the what. So we'll keep Bronfenbrenner as the biggest word. It's who or what. Well, in the first instance, he's a phenomenon, I think. People will find references to Bronfenbrenner in master's theses and in PhD theses all over the place, without the document having kind of really considered what they are applying or using the Bronfenbrenner model for. It happen, and I mean, you get some good research, but sometimes it's very much in passing, and it's like as if he's a kind of a phenomenon, and it's not always a good thing to be a phenomenon. The man himself is an interesting person. He's Russian, born in 1917. He's a Russian Jew. His parents and family fled from Russia in the 20s. His father was he was a pathologist, I think, certainly a medical, I think, pathologist, and Bronfenbrenner himself went straight into Cornell, which is the university he worked in all his life. He did his undergraduate work there as a psychologist, and then he went to, I think, Michigan for PhD work. But he was a psychologist, Conor, and he was, I think, what you'd call now a sort of scholar activist. So I think, in the first instance, his interest was in informing policy with evidence from research in the area of human development. And he was concerned in the broadest and positive sense, with the factors that impact on family life and on children and their development in context. And so, yeah, he was curious about that. His Russian background served him interestingly in the early part of his career. He went over and back on scholarships, I suppose, of one sort or another. And the first time I came across him was in his first book about the two worlds of childhood, where he did a sort of a comparative study between children growing up in the USSR, as it was then, and children growing up in the US. So his curiosity about the development of children and the factors that are impacting on that development was very central to the man, and central, I think, to the what as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking maybe, and of course he was the activist as well. We can see a lot of the work within the Head Start program in the United States. It's, you know, within the Growing Up in Ireland study, and it's sort of bandied about quite a lot. And I'm sure we'll come back to a couple of those words that you used: psychology and psychologist, context and children. Yeah. And maybe later we'll be wondering, is it only for children? Is it only for families, or could it be wider applied? Now, as a researcher, you've become very synonymous with Bronfenbrenner, and you've written a very highly regarded and well-received book about Bronfenbrenner and the application of Bronfenbrenner. Maybe as a researcher, what is it that you like about Bronfenbrenner, as opposed to just, it's a nice story in the background and it seems a nice theory, but what brings you to it as an active researcher and applied person as well?
Yeah, he's been very much part of my life, really from my undergraduate years, partly for the utterly banal reason that I visited Russia when I was a teenager, and that I had a Russian pen pal, and I was curious about Russia. And so that kind of connection was interesting to me. But more particularly, I think, Bronfenbrenner was concerned that the sort of child study movement and the study of children and children's development, and he did move it out into human development, but just let's take with children for the moment, because that's also my interest. He was concerned that that whole movement, understanding milestones of development and developmental progress and developmental delay and all of those sorts of issues, the studies were mainly done with children in laboratory contexts or non-familiar contexts, clinical settings and so forth. And his concern really was that that happens, you get the data, and then children move back into the midst of society again and into their lives again. And so that kind of interested me, and where it really hit home for me, and I think this is where Bronfenbrenner became the person that I really resonated with, was that I studied psychology this is going to age me, apart from the hair and the face, this is definitely going to age me. I studied psychology in Trinity when it was a natural science. And so distinct were the faculties at the time that the group of us who wanted to actually do philosophy were told we couldn't because it was in a different faculty. So we were definitely natural scientists. So my training was quite informed by the behaviorist approach, from which I learned a great deal. But what I learned was, when I went out to work, as I did, with people who, in the words of the time, people who had a mental handicap. I went to work in the John of God services. And I was working in a situation where all these ideas about behaviorist approaches to managing people kind of felt irrelevant to me when I was working with these people in their homes and in their environments. And I kept going back to what Bronfenbrenner was curious about, the messiness of the lived kind of development. So that's really why he resonated so much with me.
I suppose it's really what he said. It was the problem with some parts of psychology. It became almost the science of the strange behavior of strange children in strange places, doing strange things with strange adults for the briefest possible period of time, and absolutely no context to their home environment or to everywhere else, and a lot of demand characteristics and stuff like that. Something I come across, probably the same as yourself, if you do a lecture on Bronfenbrenner, it's immediately understandable. People sort of go, I get it. It's easy. It's so straightforward. And it's so appealing because it has that nice structure, the microsystem, the mesosystem, the exosystem, the macrosystem, the chronosystem, maybe the digisystem or something else. But I'm wondering what your take is on, sometimes people sort of go, oh, sure, it's not a theory in the true sense that a theory has to be able to generate, researchable questions, hypotheses. It has to morph and develop. So I think my question is, where do you stand on the issue? Is it a theory? Is it a simple cataloging system? Is it a framework? Or do we need to get tied up in purist ideas about what it is, as long as it's useful?
I think it's theory. I think Bronfenbrenner has a theory of human development. I think there are some central features of his later work which allow for further exploration, which will inform us more fully about aspects of development. So yes, I think it has a very strong theoretical dimension to it. On the other hand, I frequently find it valuable to consider it as a framework if you're thinking of applications of aspects of his model in practice. So for example, the book that you talk about, which I wrote with two colleagues, one of whom was a PhD student of mine, and who did really, really wonderful work interrogating, pulling apart Bronfenbrenner's whole kind of model and testing it with other thinkers and presenting really its potential and possibility as a space for multi-theoretical thinking. It's very multi-layered. But in that book, we used it as a framework because there are aspects and elements of it which in and of themselves become useful to practice. So yeah. I suppose sometimes I call it a framework, sometimes I call it a model, but he has a theory of human development, and the model he is presenting and went on to kind of present until 1998, kind of 2005, was furthering that. And there are people now working to examine and pull out and further it as well.
Yeah, because I think like yourself, I find that whenever people use it, or if I take a look at master's or PhD theses, that people don't even just have a small paragraph that teases out that distinction. Is it a theory, is it a framework, or how am I using it? And I'm linking back to something Aidan was talking about before the break about ethics, that sometimes you just see ethics dropped in as a section in the methodology section, and it's like I've ticked the box and move on. And it's almost, I think we see this as well. It's like, oh, I could use Bronfenbrenner in my lit review, and it's a nice cataloging system. Every time I read something, shove it into one of the bits. And then there's no sort of genetic link between Bronfenbrenner, the research questions, the methodology, or anything else. It's just dropped in and we run away from it. Yeah. But I'm wondering, and it is so easy for people to get that basic stuff. And I rarely see people trying to hurt their brain by reading some of the other stuff around, PCCT, process, person, context. Do we need to do that, or can we just use the basic stuff and be lazy and get on with it? Do we need all of that other stuff?
No, I think the richness of Bronfenbrenner is in his characterization of process, of the bi-directionality, the reciprocity of interactions and relationships. I mean, it's a core argument for that aspect people have been talking about today, about care and about love and the importance of that kind of interactive relational engagement between a person and other people and objects and symbols. And increasingly people are challenging to think about nature. The problem I think that Bronfenbrenner has, and he identified it himself in his writings in the 80s, is the same kind of problem that people like Vygotsky and Piaget and Montessori fell into. He had a very neat image. That Russian doll is, I mean, I've got 3 or 4 of them on my window, one of which I brought back from Russia when I was a child. But anyway, the fact is, it's a very visual, it captures it. And those concentric circles, everybody knows them and sees them. And the richness of his meso system within that 1979 model was kind of lost for a lot of people who see it, because it's called a system, as a system, and because it's drawn with a line. And so sometimes, that's Bronfenbrenner, in the same way as the sort of 4 operational, the 4 phases, the stages are Piaget, or the zone of proximal development is Vygotsky, or Montessori's materials become all that Montessori can be about. So I think he suffered from that. He suffered the success of that model, really, in his later stages. And so if you're really doing Bronfenbrenner, you really do need to read right up to that last Bronfenbrenner and Morris paper. Yeah. And around it, there's the lovely subsequent work by my colleague now, Jonathan Tudge, and his writings as well, which really kind of pull it out.
But Tudge's work is really important.
It is. We don't always agree, as I've discovered, but it is very
That's okay.
It is okay. No, I think that idea of process and proximal process, particularly for me as somebody whose research focus is early childhood education and care, that's very central for me.
But and you're saying, your early childhood education and care. Let me take it back a little bit, and education is nothing but, it's a broad church. We've got Aidan earlier, who's a philosopher, Anne, linguist. We've got people here, drama, Carmel and people. We've got special education needs. We've got, leadership and management. We have so many different areas of interest. Is Bronfenbrenner applicable, useful for their research? Can it be applied, or is it literally just for people like you and me who are psychologists? Is it a psychological theory, or what's your take on that? Is it?
Well, when I learned it, when I learned about it, I was learning about it as a psychological theory. I was learning it as a psychologist. I'm aware now that the whole field of psychology, I mean, psychology got a bad rap for a long time, particularly developmental psychology got a bad rap with this notion of the universal child, and you know, if we took them along, they'll all be fine. And now there's a lot of talk around developmental science or development sciences, which I think are the kind of blend of psychology, sociology, biology, and so forth into our understanding of human development. And I mean, Bronfenbrenner titled his later model the bioecological model of human development. There are really important words there: the bioecological, bio, the person, really central, the ecological, that broad definition of what ecological means, development. So any of the interests that you talk about in the context of education are interested in development and learning. So there is the potential for it to be applied. I've seen it applied in other areas, obviously, than early childhood education.
Where do you stand then on tweaking it? You know, for example, with colleagues Johnson and colleagues, the Digi system or the Chromo system. You know, because Bronfenbrenner, it's a bit like Erik Erikson. You know, lovely stuff around adolescence, but Erikson was around in the 50s, and you know, people live longer now, so we almost nearly come through that stage of identity development, adolescence, even in later life, because people live now beyond the age of 60. So theories are context to their time and to the person they were. But the internet wasn't about, and a lot of modernity wasn't about. Where do you stand on people being able to tweak or add a little bit to the system or another part of the system? Are you okay with that, or are you a bit of a purist?
No, I realize that I'm not a purist in the sense that I think, first of all, I think it's really important to see the progression. Jonathan Tudge talks about three kind of distinct phases. I see them as very interlinked, though as a sort of a trajectory rather than stage one, stage two, stage three. So I think you need to read Bronfenbrenner all the way through to see his changing kind of perspectives, to get into his head. He would be changing it now. He would be well aware of the impact of this internet world. He was concerned in his latter stages, you know, about this, the kind of chaos, a bit like what, do you remember David Elkind and the Hurried Child? I mean, those kind of things bothered Bronfenbrenner. And when I mean bothered, they were worrying him, thinking through his understanding of human development and what that means, because this was interesting to him. What does that mean for policy? What does that mean for education? He definitely did have his focus on how our understanding of human development can influence the way we provide for families and children. And so, yeah, I think it needs tweaking, and I don't think it's untrue to the man to play with it, if you like, but there are essential ingredients to it. And he is not about outcomes, for example. He's about the dynamism of development, the day-to-day reality of lived development. So it's not about outcomes, it's about opportunity, process, and that's a central feature of it.
Sure. And I have one more question for you, okay? And we're going to go back to sort of what Damien was chatting about very early this morning, and the idea of why do we go to conferences. And I think sometimes when I explain it to people, it's almost like the Paris fashion show, and you see Naomi Campbell wearing something, you go, oh my gosh, I'd never be wearing that. But the idea is you're not going to be wearing that. That's what's going to influence what's in Dunn's and Primark and Marks and Spencer's 2 years down the line. So the Paris fashion show is almost like the conference, and you go there and you see the latest concepts, the latest ideas. But even more important than that, you get to meet the designers. So I'm getting to meet you as whichever designer, Christian Dior or whoever you want to be this morning. But you get to meet the person and find out what's in their head, before it's even sketched, before it even gets to the catwalk, before it even gets to the shops, before it even gets published, before it even gets into the textbooks. So we get a very early window. And because you're such an expert and so famous in this area, the question I have, and it's only me and you, there's nobody else listening, it's just between me and you. What's next for Bronfenbrenner? What do I need to be thinking about? What do I need to be reading? What do I need to be writing about? What's next?
First of all, you know, I realize I'm not an expert because I mean, I've been revisiting Bronfenbrenner in very great detail with colleagues over the last semester. I think he needs, so we've been unpicking and unpacking, and of course the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, and there are things there to really try and untangle. I mean, he was a man of his time. You know, he had very kind of fixed ideas about the nuclear family, for example. I mean, the diversity issue is something that isn't evident in it, but it's not excluded. He has many comments which say, and other cultures, or and other situations. So he's not closed, but he definitely is of his time. But the big issue, I think, is to see the extent to which he can be operationalized in research, in actually operationalized. How do you capture the process, person, context, time, entanglement? In a what methodology? What can you do that allows you bring all of them together at the one time? Because what happens invariably is you take out this variable and that variable and the other variable, and you maybe look at them independently and then try to bring them together. But of course, the essential nature of it is the interdependence of the variables. And that's a challenge. And it's particularly challenging for quantitative research, and I'm a qualitative researcher, not a quantitative, but I appreciate the complexity for quantitative research. So that's new. And the other area, I mean, you touched on the digital. There's another whole kind of the anthropocentric. Is that the very human-centered in a world of which we are all a part? I think he understood that, but I don't think he articulated climate and nature explicitly. So that's that's a whole area for research as well. So no, there's plenty to build on. And I mean, not to kind of sanctify him, but to recognize the exciting ambition that he had to understand human development within lived life, I think.
Brilliant. And listen, and I know, Mary, I'm very conscious we've about 7 minutes here, but I do think that if there's anything comes up in the chat box, or if there's any questions that people have about it, that myself and Noirin are happy to meet on Zoom someday, chat them out, tease them out, and make that recording available to people. So Mary, if it's okay, I'll hand back to you at this stage. That's okay.
Yeah, no, that's super. I mean, I think that I'm attending that, I'm meeting with the fashion designers, and I was very fortunate in that some of the questions you posed there to Noirin, and just to share it with people, I suppose my journey in terms of my research, I'm not an early childhood age. I did work once upon a time in the sector, but that's not where my research focus is. But I am using Bronfenbrenner, as you'd know, Conor, and I am mixing and mashing it a bit with the universal design, which is a bit brave. But what I did like about him, and I wouldn't be claimed to be anything as well read as Noirin, but I've had the benefit of sitting yourself and Noirin down, sometimes I think under duress, pouring coffee into you and saying, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. But it was his multidisciplinary approach, which we're going back to. Noirin spoke about the siloed thinking in terms of she was in psychology. There was once, a purist approach. I mean, there's a big push on at the moment that we need to go back to multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, that policy and practice need to possibly be an awful lot more connected. And I feel the more I read of him, he got that. And he got what it meant to belong to your research, and he got what it meant to be human in your research.
I think, Mary, that's right, because he pointed out the problem with a lot of, I suppose, the developmental psychology, the standard sort of classical theories. Freud will talk about psychosexual development, Erikson will talk about psychosocial, Piaget will talk about cognitive, Kohlberg will talk about moral development, etc., but they're all in their silos. So Piaget has no interest in anything else, and Freud has no interest in what Piaget is thinking about. But Bronfenbrenner is almost giving you the nice wrapping paper. You have to have all of those and understand the biological person and the psychological development. But we need to understand that, put that into the real life, put it into the context, and that becomes more multidisciplinary, and it's needed. And it was almost when he published that quote, Noirin, I think, was it the American Psychologist, 1977, The Science of Strange Behavior. It really just grabbed people, and they're going, oh yeah, we've been a bit blind to this for so long,
Exactly, yeah.
Melanie has just put in the chat box, love the idea of operationalizing a model in research, interdependence of the variables, the entanglement of research. Research is a messy business.
Yeah.
And I think that's...
But research is messy, and COVID has shown us that over the past year, that it's not, forget about your methodology textbooks, that's not the real world. The real world is dirty, it's messy. We're not down at the back of college in a chemistry laboratory with nice clean tests. We're doing research with dirty test tubes in the real world. And research is nothing but honest. And this is why really good methodologies are just, they're honest, and they just say, this is what I did, or this is what I planned to do, and this is what went wrong, and this is how I puzzled it out or figured it out, and here's how we moved it forward. And it's just an honest account of what was done. And I think people just need to put that in and not feel that they're going to be marked down for it or something. Just tell the truth of the research. That's what it's about. And
Shaling, who will be coming up talking soon, has said that she, even within her research about virtual reality, she can find connections between Bronfenbrenner's ecology theory and the use of cutting edge technology.
Yeah,
so that's bringing it into the real world.
Yeah,
even further on. It's quite Star Trek-y things. Katrina's put up, it is the proximal processes that are the aspects of quality in early education.
The proximal process, he called the proximal process the engines of development. I mean, we have to prove that. That still has to be proved. It's a very appealing idea, and one that I find myself in agreement with. You have to, we have to push that further to establish what does it really look like. But the essential element of his later thinking, and the core really of it, is the importance of process, and the role that these proximal processes, these ever more complex interactions that happen on a regular basis, very relevant to children. The question then becomes, what does a proximal process look like? Well, in technology, what does a proximal process look like? What does a proximal process look like with Anne's old, as Anne, that little piece with Anne's daughter, when she's getting older, what do the proximal processes look like then? So they are about the relationship of the developing individual with the world. And I think maybe too often we think of them in that mother-baby kind of context. They need to be kind of theorized out into a much broader base, and I think could be. But they are, I think, the process is central.
Something that I found myself thinking about, and I put a question to both of you, this might be a bit outlandish, but it's in terms of the proximal processes and me as researcher and my research, which harks back a little bit to the previous session when they were saying ethics needs to be a red line throughout, and back to the session that was on this morning with Viv, where he was saying that feeling of love and belonging, and you become some of the data and your research. And I found that with Bronfenbrenner's thinking, you can, in an ethical way. Would you have any comment, either of you, on that?
Depending on the design of your research, you are part of it. And I mean, even in some of his work where he takes, in a lot of Bronfenbrenner's writing, people would find that he goes to other people's research to try and untangle what he's trying to find there. And he'll criticize it because it's all about the child and not about the mother child. The mother doesn't feature. It's then you look at the mother and the child, but there's the researcher, and the researcher doesn't feature. So you do have to try and untangle the tangle whilst keeping the essence of it together. So I don't see anything inherently wrong with thinking about yourself as part of the process in the type of work you're doing. I mean, it's different if it's medical research and you're literally in a laboratory, you know, that's a different.
Yeah, I think you've hit something there, Noirin. It's about keeping the essence. And I think that's been the biggest challenge for researchers over the pandemic, when things moved online and, you know, they felt that distance, the physical distance came in, and how do we maintain the essence in a physical?
I think Mary, and I'm conscious we're going to wrap up. I think a critical thing here for people is recognizing the importance of a good positionality section, being honest about who and what you are in the research. You know, your prejudicial thoughts, discriminatory reactions, but we're not perfect. We're not robots. We're trying not to, back to the ethics, we're trying not to infect the data, and we're trying to not become affected by the data. And it's a very difficult juxtaposition to be in, and also a good reflexivity on the other side of that, and it's the ivity bit. And I'll just one more little point. You know, all myself and Noirin are doing here, I think, is we're agreeing with each other that we're not maybe quite as knowledgeable as maybe what people always think we are, but we're prepared to talk it out, tease it out. You're disagreeing with Jonathan Tudge, but at least it's we're learning, we're reflecting, we're moving that forward. And I think it's, you know, for people here, there's, you know, Melanie's here with a fantastic podcast series on sociology. We have, you know, we've other colleagues, Joanne Banks with special education needs. We've got Shelley with her stuff. And it's really about democratizing knowledge. There's the only big word I know. We're democratizing knowledge, thinking about it, talking about it, and teasing it out, really.